how many of the agencies, 20 or so agencies, I think, in the state of Minnesota, public agencies, how many have rampant fraud?
Of the largest, there are 10 of our largest primary agencies. Many of the nonprofits receive grants and funding.
What do you think the total losses are to Minnesotans in terms of fraud?
That would be about $9 billion.
$100 million in cash through the airport.
In suitcases, back then it was $1 million at a crack.
Where is this money going?
It goes to terrorism. It goes to child trafficking. It goes to drugs. It goes to terrorism. And then it's used to purchase luxury items.
How much of this money has left Minnesota for overseas? Senator Cornyn, let me just come back to you. I want to get a handle here on just the scale of the fraud in Minnesota. We talked about the dark money groups funding much of what's going on the ground, but let's just get a handle here on the scale of the fraud. You are a member, I want to get this right, of the the Office of the Legislative Auditor. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, of the Legislative Audit Commission.
Audit Commission, got you. You oversee the Office of the
Yes.
Legislative Auditor. Okay, got it. So you've got access to all of this information. Give me your best estimate based on the information you've seen, the audits you've seen. How many of the agencies, 20 or so agencies, I think, in the state of Minnesota, public agencies, how many have rampant fraud?
All of them are wrapped up in some sort that can issue. There's 20 primary state agencies in state law. Of the largest, there are 10 of our largest primary agencies. Many of the nonprofits receive grants and funding from all 10 agencies.
If you had to put a number on it, based on what you've seen, your work, your investigations, the audits that you've seen, what do you think the total losses are to Minnesotans in terms of fraud?
I think the conservative number is what our federal investigators have determined. Of just the 14 Medicaid programs, that half of all of it would be about $9 billion. And I don't think that's, and I think the reason I believe that's true is in each audit that the legislative auditor produces, we measure right level in the samples of what they have done. 20 to 80% of each one of them, they're unable to prove that the dollars were actually have gone to the programs in which they're indicated.
$9 billion. How much of this money has left Minnesota for overseas?
Well, I arrived in 2017. The Child Care Assistance Program fraud, for which the program, I believe, is $130 million. The whistleblowers showed us that they believe $100 million of that was fraudulent. We had a whistleblower come forward, actually publicly, and at that time we also discovered something new to me, which is the Hawala process of the movement of cash through our airports in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And what I've come to learn, in that year it was just coincidentally $100 million in fraud, suspected fraud, and $100 million went out in cash through the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. I've learned that.
Tell us how that worked. $100 million in cash through the airport.
In suitcases, back then it was $1 million at a crack. And so I've learned that in the year before it was about $74 million. Secretary Bessent I've tried for 2.5 years to get that number because I wanted to get a view of how many excess dollars are sent out from the program, from the community that's sending them. And in the last 2 years, it was $340 million each year. And so if you look at it, it's about a 25% increase over this period from 2017. That's $1.8 billion in cash. And I don't think the average citizen who works for their money understands how complicated it is to ship or to obtain $6 to $7 million of cash every single week of the year. And our federal government certainly must have been aware of it and has done nothing to look at it. But that's just all but about $130 million, I think, is originated out of Minnesota.
You know, but what every American taxpayer absolutely understands is their federal tax money being taken on suitcases out of this country to go heaven knows where. I mean, if that's not infuriating, I don't know what is. And the fact that it is systemic in Minnesota, and probably to your testimony, Mr. Talco, probably systemic in a lot of other places. I mean, millions of dollars in suitcases out of an airport, and that's just one means of shipping this money around. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. I want to come back to you, Mr. Talco. You testified that about $1 trillion you think is lost in fraud every year. Where is this money going? I mean, we know where some of it's going in Minnesota. It went overseas. It went to Somalia. It went to NGO fronts. We know where it's gone in some other states. California gave away billions of dollars to a pro-Hamas NGO. But $1 trillion nationally, where's this money going to?
I appreciate that question because most people don't ask that question. It goes to terrorism. It goes to child trafficking. It goes to drugs. It goes to terrorism. And then it's used to purchase luxury items, cars, purses, homes. That's all funded by people like me that pay taxes.
So you're telling me that the electrician who goes to work every day and clocks in and works his butt off and tries to earn just enough to be able to, make his rent, maybe have a kid or two, put food on the table, his tax money is being used to buy other people luxury items, cars, yachts, whatever else, and is going to fund terrorism and child trafficking?
Yes, sir.
$1 trillion a year on this stuff?
$115 million an hour.
$115 million an hour. How do they get in their hands on it? What are we talking about here? Trends, national organizations, criminal networks? How do they get their hands on this money?
They take advantage of antiquated government systems and processes. They go into programs that they know elected and appointed officials won't touch, and they can steal at scale. And what happened really was during the pandemic, between the PPP loans and the unemployment insurance, they learned a really valuable lesson. Government never runs out of money, and the probability of getting caught is virtually zero. I have it at 0.1%.
So come back to the recommendations that you mentioned in your opening statement. What do we need to do to put a stop to this hemorrhaging of people's hard-earned money going overseas to finance child trafficking and luxury yachts? I mean, what needs to happen here?
It's really simple. It's used every single day in the commercial sector. Front-end identity verification, you just don't get to say, I am who I say I am. Second, recertification of all the recipients. There is so much fraud right now in the benefit programs all across the country. We need to get a baseline. Third, this notion of a third-party independent audit. And finally, is involving federal law enforcement, like the Secret Service, to investigate it. The thing that people don't understand is that most of these beneficiaries, Senator, they're not real. They're fake. They're someone's stolen identity that is getting used in all 50 states.
We've talked about some of the necessary steps that are needed here to deal with the sort of fraud and corruption that we've been talking about today. And I want to add one more to that, and that is prosecution. As a former prosecutor, there's nothing like the power of prosecution. And when you've got $60 million in dark money flowing through at least 14 different groups just for the Minnesota protests alone, to say nothing of other protests, anti-law enforcement protests we've seen around the country, many of these groups using foreign money. By the way, no foreign entity has any rights to the First Amendment in the United States of America. And when you are funneling and funding activity that is itself illegal, the assault on cops is illegal, blowing up cars on the California freeway, that's illegal. Disrupting students trying to go to school on our campuses, that's illegal. And over again, we see this money through these same networks flowing in to create these riots, these protests, these divisions. There needs to be prosecutions here. So I just renew my call to the Department of Justice to investigate these groups, these dark money groups, untangle this web, and bring prosecutions wherever you can, because the American people deserve to have control of their government, not some foreign billionaire or set of billionaires, not some shadowy group of American billionaires. It ought to be the American people, we the people, not we the billionaires, who are trying to control our discourse and, yes, our elections in many cases through their foreign money, their access, their influence. It's got to stop, and one of the best ways to stop it is with prosecution. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here.